to identify these for our website and for readers to be able to go on and learn more about the history of Bartow County. And of course that goes hand in hand with what Joe Head's going to talk about, I think, in another week on this show.
Right.
The Bartow Scholars Program, and of course Joe's on me left and right to finish this, so it enhances what he's already done, and he's done a terrific job on the website.
And he's going to be talking about the interactive mapping too. Are y'all going to have these little communities on the map?
We will, and the interactive mapping is going to be great because it will also show should show eventually a time sequence when all these communities existed and when they just faded away.
Right.
And as I say, a lot of these communities are no more in the family. They just lived there at the time and did whatever they did, mined or plowed the fields. The aspect of the people, I originally did 21 or 22, which are up on the website. I've identified another 10 or 15 to do. It just takes a while to get this done. Unfortunately, I'm not retired. I'm still working.
Right. I know how you feel.
And research. It seems like for every sentence you write, you're going to do an hour's worth of research on some of these communities. And you got to go sit. You got to look through the microfilm, read the newspapers, find every history book you can find on Bartow County in the state of Georgia, and you got to look. And it's very difficult, and I know I'm way behind on what I'm doing. For the listeners that do go on the website, and we've gotten a good bit of press on that website, I understand the biggest hit people, or the biggest area that they review, are the places on the website. Unfortunately, right now the places are not where they ought to be. We originally, with the website, we put up what I had done originally sort of as a sample, and we put them up, but a lot of that information is going to be replaced. I would say 85% of what's on the website for places right now will sometime in the next few months all be replaced, and then we'll also try to come up with pictures, or if it's a post office, maybe a postmark of that particular place, something, 1, 2, 3 items that will represent what that place stood for, and also a map showing approximately where it is.
Do you ask people in the community if they have anything of grandparents, great-grandparents, to please send you a copy?
I have not, because when I started this, I really didn't have time to stop and start asking a lot of people. Now, if I knew someone that lived in a particular location, I might give them a call and ask them what they had. But I want this, or the society really wants this to be kind of more interactive, maybe open source, so to speak. So if people have something to add to that community history, to contact the Historical Society, and we can write that in. If it's credible information, we will put that into it. By no means what we put up there is going to be the end of that community and the gospel, so to speak, on what it was about. We want to add additional information.
I don't think a lot of people in the community realize how much history is here. There's no way you can do it in months, years. There's a lot of history here.
There is, and when I started with the Etowah Valley Historical Society in around 1983, there wasn't much written about the Historical Society. You had Lucy Cunnius's History of Bartow County. You may have a few articles that you could find that had been written in the Journal-Constitution.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, through the years, now you've got 50, 60, 70 books. Of course, everybody has a computer as a publisher now.
Right.
So we have so many books out there now and so much information about Bartow County. And I'm always amazed when I grab a book and just read back through it. I'll find something that strikes me, or some information about one of these communities or one of these people that I have read over. Yeah. And I've read probably the history of Bartow County probably 5 or 6 times cover to cover, and every time I go back through it, I'll find something different.
Right.
I wish in the early days of the society I had, when Lucy Cunnius was still alive, and Emmy Nelson, and other people like Fred Knight, Jerry White, of course, in those days, had a lot of knowledge on history of Bartow County. And unfortunately, it's like you don't listen to your parents and your grandparents enough. And I didn't take it all in like I should have at the time, and I wish I did.
Well, they say like Jackson's store was the place for everybody to meet and gossip and talk about what was going on in the community. And it would be great if somebody had wrote that down.
That's correct.
It's, yeah.
Very much so.
Well, tell us about some of these communities that you're going to be working on.
Well, we'll start with one of the common ones. We'll start with Cartersville. That's easiest. One of the things I learned in researching Cartersville is that the first post office name was Cherokee. And basically Cartersville got his name around 1846. Of course, there's that story that goes around about Ferris Carter and Nathaniel Lewis down in the little community of Birmingham at the overpass on 293 south of Cartersville. You know, kind of a jest, name this after me. He said no to Birmingham. However, go on up the road. Well, when you now find out there's a post office there that had been there 4 years at that particular time, that basically was named Cherokee, you can kind of tie the dates back together when the post office officially changed the name of Cartersville in 46. However, Cartersville wasn't incorporated actually until 1950, but that was just an interesting tidbit that I had never read anywhere before, but I just happened to run across it.
I happened to see that 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first time I had seen it,
and actually,
I ran across it.
Actually, I Googled post offices to find that, and but that was quite interesting. But well, let's think of another one.
Let's do one that people don't know much about. How about Sophia?
Sophia is one that I even don't know a lot about. you pick one. Grassdale, Sophia, Boche or Boche. Those are very tough. For instance, Grassdale and Boche are over in the area of Cass White Road and Old Grassdale Road. However, the maps are not really specific like they are today. You can't count on exactly the way the map writer or drawer put that particular location. However, I've seen Boche on 2 or 3 different maps, and it all lends to that particular area. Now, that could have been basically the post office for Grassdale, but I can't really prove that right now. So it's going to take a lot more research on some of these particular locations. The one we were what was the one we were talking about a while ago?
Bolivar?
Well, Bolivar is one. Bolivar is one of those communities that really doesn't exist anymore. Now, you showed me a picture of a grist mill near where the map shows that site to be, which is basically up Highway 411, kind of at the intersection of where Pine Log Creek and Sugar Valley Sugar Hill Creek come together.
Right before you get to Flexitile.
Right in that particular area, but time has not permitted to go put on the hiking boots and walk through the woods along the railroad and along the L&N railroad line there. Or at least I call it the L&N rail line from 1906. But those type of places are going to have more research, and the community is going to have to help on that. And that's one of those areas that when I post on the website, that basically, hopefully, somebody will have the information.
Well, I can guarantee you that me and my husband this fall will have our boots on, and we will be in those woods. We were gonna hike around Sugar Hill this fall and see, because you never know what you're gonna stumble on.
No,
out there.
And Sugar Hill's interesting itself. Bobby Neal took me up about 3 or 4 months ago up into Sugar Hill. Quite interesting, the ruins that are up there from the old mining camps and the prison camp. A lot of mining, you might see remnants of a washer plant from the mining that took place up there. But it is quite interesting about that history, and probably 99% of the population of Bartow County will never go there and never see it. But it's beautiful up on top of that Pine Log Mountain.
Yep.
No doubt. A lot of communities, I find, you go up like 411, the old L&N line, which was built in 1906. A lot of the communities started to revolve around that railroad. The same thing with the Western Atlantic Railroad. You found out a lot of the communities grew up along the Western Atlantic Railroad, or even parts of the old Rome Railroad And so a lot of, how would you say, you see a lot of migration of people or shifts of population to bigger centers. For instance, Kingston. Kingston basically, my research would indicate, was founded basically because the railroad took a turn going west from the east to the north. Well, if it had gone on straight, it would have been going toward Rome. However, it made that turn there. The population, well, I'll say an agricultural population, and what existed maybe a mile to the west of present-day Kingston, called Conesina. And then if you go a little farther to the west there, you had Wooley's Plantation, where that particular agricultural community had evolved. There was a stagecoach stop there. And then you go on into Murchison's and so forth. Well, when that railroad turned, everybody wanted to be near the railroad.
Right.
And so the Conesina, people lived in Conesina. I proposed that they shifted, and as time permitted, they moved into the Kingston proper area. Just like the Kingston Methodist Church used to be the Conesina Methodist Church. So around 1856, it moved, and the whole congregation moved with it. You see the same thing in Cartersville. When Cartersville developed, you can kind of follow the churches. You
Right.
had the Pettit's Creek Baptist Church, which was out Mission Road beyond Nancy's Creek, or this side of Nancy's Creek. And when Cartersville was formed, eventually they moved into town and became the Cartersville Baptist Church before it became the First Baptist Church. Then you had the same thing with the Sam Jones Methodist Church. The forerunner was over in the area of Oak Hill Cemetery, and the name's eluding me offhand, but anyway, that church was destroyed by a tornado, but it moved into town, became the Cartersville Methodist Church East, and then the Sam Jones Methodist later. So, and then you've got the Presbyterian Church, which was the Friendship Presbyterian Church, which was out near the river, south of town on 293
Right.
to the left. And of course the population shifted back into town. When that community was established along the railroad, it seemed like the population followed everywhere. The same thing with, take White, Georgia. White, Georgia pretty much grew up on the old Tennessee Road, which was west of current day White, Georgia. Of course, when then the railroad course came along 20 years so after it was originally established, and a lot of the business started moving a little more toward the railroad. However, when 411 up through White was created, then the town kind of shifted. Now, granted, a fire occurred in the old business district of White, but they did not rebuild there. After about 7 to 10 years, they moved over to the east side of the railroad and established more of the town there, especially along the highway.
Do you know much about Dewey, the area of Dewey? My assistant is from Dewey, and she's been looking for some things about that area. Do you have any information about the Dewey area?
Well, actually, you're asking about the hardest communities there are to know about.
I'm
so
sorry.
I was going to look. They did have a post office between 1898 and 1904. I think it would be in someone's home in that particular area, and the only remnant of anything you see there is the Dewey Baptist Church. However, when you go look at the Dewey Baptist Church website, you try to go research it, you can't find out who it was named after. Who was Dewey? Was that a name of a president, or was that a name? Was that some girl's name? Was it some boy's name? You just don't know.
The first
And
pastor, maybe?
It could have been.
Yeah.
There's just no way of knowing the answer to that, and but I'm going to run across it one day, or somebody's going to call in or write in and say, I know the answer. But
Right.
I think when you go back and look at a lot of these newspapers, you'd be surprised how many tornadoes have destroyed buildings in this
Right.
community. Going back into the late 1800s, I run across that quite a lot. It would be interesting to map where all the tornadoes actually hit or go.
Yeah.
Or maybe it wouldn't be. Nobody might want to live in that area. But
We'll have to find somebody that wants to do that.
that's right. Another interesting community that I ran across, and I'm still kind of scratching my head over, but I think I have an answer on it, was Hall Station in Linwood. And that's basically on Hall Station Road at the intersection. Everybody looks at the intersection of Barnsley Gardens Road and CCC Road. The old maps show that CCC Road. I don't know what the name was. There was no name on any of the maps. And I gather without further information that the CCC prior to World War II, Civilian Conservation Corps, that they used that as a project as they were living at, or camped at Clear Lake nearby, that basically they updated that road and maybe either paved it or graveled it or whatever at the time. They obviously didn't straighten it because it does have a lot of curves. But everybody looks at that when you say, where's Hall Station? That's Hall Station. Now, Miss Louise Ward, before she died, she used to be a librarian at the Cartersville High School. And she was a member of the society. And she took me out there one day and she said, now, one of these days when I'm gone, somebody's going to say Hall Station was down the street here. And this is about a mile north of where everybody considers Hall Station. And she said, no, it's right there across on the railroad, right across from my house. And so I always remember that. So I have remembered that to today. So the original Hall Station was basically a farmer, a wood stop, and a water stop right there. And he supplied the wood and the water for the locomotive engines on the Western Atlantic. Of course, over time, apparently, commerce or a store or two started to evolve at that intersection of roads with the two roads intersecting the Hall Station Road, which was obviously named after Mr. Hall. And a community kind of sprang up, and it took the name Hall Station. Now, at some point, that wood and water stop ceased to exist when Mr. Hall apparently passed away or whatever, but I can't find really a good record of him. I think his name was Thomas J. Hall, if I'm not mistaken. I found that in a book referencing that name, but I can't find really anything dealing with the death of him. However, that little community took that name. But over time, they discovered minerals in that particular area on the Barnsley property and off the Barnsley property there. And American Sonamide, however you pronounce that, a northern company, mining company, they came in and they started mining the area. And all of a sudden now the name changes to Linwood. Now, why Linwood? I have no earthly idea. I've read a lot of the books that have been written on family histories and so forth. Linwood is primarily mentioned, but they don't say why. Now, if you go to the dictionary, you'll find Linwood's another name for basswood. Now, were there abundance of basswood trees there? I don't know. It could have been. Or is that a name in a community up north where Sonamide home office was? We may never know the answer to that. But the name they used it, and the post office changed. There was a post office there, and the name changed to Linwood. But that post office, and then there was a little school, and of course there was the church there. And after a while, and I'm not going to look at my dates, people can read this on the website later, but maybe in the 20s, 30s, it changed. All of a sudden, Linwood kind of ceased to exist in everybody's mind, and it picked up on Hall Station again. So now everybody knows it's Hall Station. Only sign for Linwood is basically a little street sign on the other side of the church there in that little community. So it's kind of an interesting history and kind of a confusing history, but you just have to just kind of make some assumptions. Now, my wife will tell me many times that I'm making up history, but I say I'm not.
No, but some of it will be trying to piece it together. I mean, you have to on some of it because there's not records for everything.
You do. You actually do. It's just, who's telling the tale? You don't try to use somebody else's exact words and so forth when you're writing, so you have to kind of alter it a little to be yours and not plagiarize what they have. So there are some freedoms there sometimes, but I think basically the way I put it in a general way is the way that little community worked. With some of the others, another one that kind of interested me was a little community of Eves. The name, that's E-V-E-S, the name's kind of unique. It's right on the Bartow Floyd line, on the Rome Road out of Kingston. It was named after John P. Eve, who lived between 1800 and 1868. What really stands out on the map when you see it on a number of old maps, you see the Eves Mill, you see the Eves Ferry on the Etowah River, you see the Eves Station on the Rome Railroad, and you see the Eves Syrup Press. And so you really take a look at that and say this is an enterprising a gentleman back in the after the Civil War,
Right.
maybe until the 1880s, 1890s. I don't really know when it ended. Eventually it did go off the map, but even though some of these communities, so to speak, cease to exist, sometimes they're not removed from the maps because people get used to saying, hey, that's over at Eves, and it doesn't get removed.
Right.
And so it's hard to tell when it actually ceased, but he died in, say in 1868, but he had a son that was a partner also, who was younger. He may have continued that on for a lot more years.
Did this community have a post office?
It did not have a post office that I can tell. Mr. Eves apparently was quite influential because he was a director on the Rome Railroad at one time, along with Alfred Shorter and John Johnson in Rome. And Alfred Shorter, is kind of a well-known name in Floyd County. Shorter College named after him, and there was also a railroad engine that was also named after Shorter, running that line. So he must have had some money or influence to do that. So I'm sure he had quite a enterprise.
Well, several of them, other places like this around the county, did more than one thing.
They did.
They wasn't like today. You have a store, you sell something. It's back then they did several things to make money.
Well, that's right. You farmed it home, especially in these rural areas. Basically, you farm, you sold the meat, the cows, the pigs, the chickens, whatever you need to do. You sold grain. Most every farmer, seemed that was on a creek, basically had some type of mill, whether it was a grist mill or whether it was a sawmill. And they used so much for their own consumption, they sold the rest.
The grist mill that's at Spring Bank, was that owned by Howard?
We believe that was owned by Howard and operated for probably his own consumption and his own family. Now, it could have been used also by cement people because that was a pretty good size operation with a lot of employees, so they could have been generating grain also for the cement plant. Don't know the answer to that. I've just seen the ruins like you, and I know J.B. Tate that's one of his real hot buttons at Spring Bank, and we've never talked about that being used for any type of commercial operation.
It's a beautiful place.
It is a beautiful place. Some of these, I'll give you one, for instance, a larger mill operation would be Cave, Georgia. Basically, Cave was a community on Highway 293. However, Highway 293 then wasn't exactly the way it is now. It was a little farther to the left. But it's right maybe a mile before you get to Kingston on 293 if you're coming from Cartersville. You'll look over to the left and you'll see Two Run Creek, and it goes under an iron bridge, I believe, on the Weaver's property. That iron bridge was part of the old, basically, Cartersville to Kingston to Rome Road. And they still use it as a driveway. And you can still see the water in front of the current house, and that was more of a water retention pond. But at that site, there was a large mill. And basically, they produced right at 1 million pounds of grain a year.
Wow.
And they shipped a lot of it out on the railroad there. And so Cave was a flag station. It was also a name of a post office there. Now, in the late 30s, 1930s, for 2 or 3 or 4 years, the flag station there was used for people to come from Atlanta to go out to Saltpeter Cave, because they had the dances in that cool cave and the floor of that. So they had a dance floor and these grand steps going down to it, and people would pay to come up, and either they would walk the 2 miles to the cave, or they would arrange for somebody to meet them with a carriage and take them over there. So that was another purpose at cave. But that was a large mining operation for a long time, up into the probably World War II. And a lot of these old mills that made it through into the 20th century seemed to kind of shut down by the time World War II came along.
Right. In your research, when you're doing this, are you finding the postmasters of the time?
Occasionally. The sources that I have been using are probably not as good as the one you just handed me when I came in here. I'll have to readily admit, I'm good at jumping on the computer and looking up U.S. post offices.
Right.
Now, really the place to go, and you may have an excerpt from it. If you go to the National Archives and you look under their listing of items, they do have apparently microfilm of the U.S. post offices by state. And also it says that there could be photographs of those post offices and the maps of the exact locations. So that would take a trip to Washington, D.C. to go research that and find out what is actually there. And that's something I would like to do, or entice somebody to do that for me, since I'm still working.
Well, I'm a genealogist at heart, so I dig. You know.
Well, maybe I'll contribute your trip to Washington, D.C. But that would really be nice if you could hit the bonanza there and find it and get exactly where those locations were. Because I think what people need to understand, in the rural times of Bartow County, where the cities really weren't that big, basically people worked on these farms, they worked at these mills all over Bartow County. And a lot of the houses there would file for a 3rd or 4th class post office permit. And so it may be no more than a desk in a house. For instance, Milebone out on Harley Road that Frederick Knight owns now. That's an 1866 home, but it was a post office for a number of years. But it was a larger plantation, agricultural plantation, and they probably were the post office for the surrounding 2 or 3, 4, 5 houses, and maybe 50 people, 60 people.
Right.
Barnsley Gardens was a large operation of agriculture and mining, so they would have had a post office for a number of years. That the mail would be dropped off there and distributed, or would be picked up.
And some would be in grocery stores and other places like Cass.
Yeah, it could be, because the old post office in Cass, of course, that's post Civil War. Basically, and I can't remember the dates on the old building that's still left there, which was a post office at one time. But a lot of these houses, a lot of these places don't exist anymore.
Right.
What was I trying to think?
I'm sorry, I got you off track.
That's all right. Like Etowah Valley, John Sharp Rowland's home there at the intersection of 11361, right across from the airport and so forth. That was a post office at one time in the house there. And according to the gentleman who's just finished researching all that area, of course the house was apparently in that curve as you go around where the cemetery is up on the hill on the right, across from the runway. And as you go around, that house sat there. And that's a high enough elevation where they could view the river and so forth.
You'd be amazed how many people around Bartow County does not know what that cemetery is. They pass by it and they see it, but they don't realize what it is.
Well, it's been cleaned up and then it grows up.
Yeah,
now,
but it's important. It's very important.
Now it is really cleaned up. The gentleman did it. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name. He did an excellent job cleaning it up. He paid for his own historical marker for the Rowland property there, which is on the side of the road. And so it tells a little story about John Sharp Rowland. However, I also have to remember that Rowland Springs out on Center Road was another one of his properties, so you can't confuse the two. The Rowland Springs property, when he moved here, he bought both properties, and they're pretty far apart.
Right.
But the Rowland Springs property basically was a resort, basically a
Yes.
pre-Civil War resort that everybody came to.
That's up my way. I live
Yeah.
up past it.
And I've read anywhere between up to 30 or 40 springs on that property. Now it encompasses a big area. I think you can see some of the springs on the Highway 20 spur and in that other parallel road. I can't think of the name. You can see some of them off on the side. There's a lot of springs in that area. And that brings into Center, and Center basically got its name. Now, after the Civil War, you try to bring Rolling Springs back, and it survived for a while, but it kind of faded away.
I hope you're fixing to tell me where Center got its name, because 15,000 people have asked me this, and I don't have a clue.
Well, I'm going to read you what is going to be posted now.
All right, y'all better listen, because y'all have asked me and I don't have a clue.
Give me 1 second to thrum through this. Now, I'm going to have to say, I put Joe Head on this one, because he said he would do it, and I held him to it. And he went out and he asked, and he rewrote it, and he rewrote it, and he rewrote it. But he finally came up with an acceptable excuse, and I'm getting there in 1 second. There's so many communities here.
I went out and did an interview with Mr. Branton. He's been there most of his life. Homer Branton. He's 92 now, I believe, and great stories. But he didn't even know how Center got its name. We thought he might know, but he didn't.
Well, this is exactly what's going to be written. In 1849, George White, an Episcopal minister, historian, archaeologist, conducted a study entitled Statistics of the State of Georgia, which describes various mineral spring locations throughout the state. According to his notation of Rolling Springs, he was impressed with the area, hotel, and quality of spring water. He comments that, in parentheses, they are becoming every season the center of fashion. Multitudes from every part of the state resort here to partake of the excellent water, as well as the liberal fare of the worthy proprietor. So basically, that center of fashion stuck when Rolling Springs ceased to exist as a resort, other than a private home. So everybody picked up on that center.
Well, Mildred Stockbaum actually told me this, that is the center of fashion, but we laughed and didn't believe it.
No, it is hard to believe.
So that is the truth.
That is it, apparently.
Wow. Okay.
And we're going to stick with it until somebody can prove us wrong.
Well, I bet they don't, because it's hard to find. I mean, you got to go with what you find, and there's not a whole lot out there on Center.
No, there's really not, and that's the problem with a lot of these little communities. You just see them dotted all over the map, but you have to dig, and hopefully people will find this interesting once we get all of this posted. Finish out some of these communities.
Yes, that would be nice.
I noticed one like Taylorsville. Before it even got its name, it was basically had a post office there for that agricultural community, and they called it Mountain House. So you do find a conflict sometime of what ultimately became the community name or the town name versus what the original post office was.
So Taylorsville used to be named?
It would have been the post office Mountain House. So if you were going to that section, you would say, well, I'm going over to the Mountain House post office, not Taylorsville. But now I've got the location of that, but I don't know exactly where that location is, and I have not had spent the time to go find exactly where that hill was. You're going
to have to retire, so you have more time for this.
I know, it just takes so much. Now, another interesting one is Rogers Station on 293, where Iron Belt Road crosses. Iron Belt Road used to be basically the Iron Belt Railroad. And the Iron Belt Railroad began at Rogers Station and went across, followed Iron Belt Road, then across 41, across the Country Club property, over into the mining pits along the L&N, and then eventually it went on up through Aubrey and into Sugar Hill. But basically, the post office for Rogers Station was actually Fairview. And that was a big challenge for me one day to find out what was the name of Fairview. My wife Linda and I, we played with that for about an hour and a half at home, looking everywhere we could find to see what Fairview stood for. However, it finally dawned on us, break down the name, Faro, iron, butte, flat surface, area, hill, and when you go out there, that's what you see. So when the Mr. Rogers, if he was the one who actually established the post office, or if someone else did, or the railroad did, you don't really know, but basically they came up with that name, Faro Butte, and named the post office there, even though Rogers Station was the name that stuck for that particular mining and agricultural community.
Right.
So it's all very interesting.
It is. Well, what have you got coming up next? That you're gonna? Are you still gonna work on this for a while, or?
I'm going to finish this. I'm going to and get this done. As I say, I want to get the pictures, and I want to get all this up. As far as the Historical Society, it's never ending. I was told a couple of weeks ago that they were going to need my help because we were going to be hosting the Georgia Trust again. We have helped, seemed like in the past, we've hosted them twice, and that's a major undertaking to have that group come to Cartersville. And I'd be happy to be involved with that again, touring the county. Altoona Pass is a big thing for me. I got involved in that back in about 93 or 94 when the society took it over from the Corps of Engineers, took a lease on it. I was very instrumental in working with the state to take over that lease and add it to the Red Top lease. And I am an advisor along with Joanne Smith and Diane Mooney and so forth to Red Top Mountain State Park for Altoona Pass. And of course next year, 2014 will be our 150th anniversary, and so we are trying to put together a very good program for that year and for the Civil War in Bartow County as a whole, because 1864 would have been the anniversary beginning in May of 1864. However, Altoona Pass was in October. So we have a big year planned for next year, and hopefully to add a couple more monuments. The final two monuments